Welcome to Still Unanswered. I'm Mara Kwan. Today we're revisiting the case of Elisa Lam, the young woman whose disappearance at the Cecil Hotel and the now infamous elevator video captivated the internet and raised a lot of painful questions. We'll be careful and clear. I'll separate what investigators and medical examiners found from the swirl of theories that followed. Andrew, thanks for joining.
Thanks, Mara. I'm Andrew Patel. As a clinical psychologist, I'm here to help unpack the mental health context and also to talk about how the video's virality shaped public perception. I want to be explicit up front. We will rely only on the documented facts and well-sourced reporting for the timeline, and will mark speculation as such. Let's begin.
Okay, fact first. Elisa Lam was born April 30th, 1991 in Vancouver, to parents who emigrated from Hong Kong. She traveled alone through California in early 2013 and checked into the Cecil Hotel, also operating as Stay on Main, in downtown LA on January 26, 2013. Her last confirmed sighting was January 31. She was supposed to check out and go to Santa Cruz. When her daily calls home stopped, her family reported her missing, and LAPD began an investigation.
Right. And the timeline moves quickly into public attention because of a piece of evidence released in February 2013, the elevator surveillance footage from the Cecil. But before we get to that footage and how it exploded across the web, Mara, can you tell listeners who Elisa was beyond the headlines?
Yes. Elisa was a Canadian university student with interests in literature, fashion, photography, and internet culture. She kept a Tumblr blog where she posted art, quotes, and candid reflections about loneliness and mental health. Those posts later became part of how people tried to understand her state of mind. She was more than a clip. She was a daughter, a traveler, and a writer in her own right.
And that blog is important context, because Elisa had a documented history of bipolar disorder and depression. The coroner later listed bipolar disorder as a significant condition contributing to her death. Family members told investigators about prior episodes. Her sister said Elisa sometimes believed someone was following her and would hide, even under beds during those episodes. So we have clinical history that matters to interpreting behavior, though it never provides a complete explanation.
Exactly. Let's be precise about what happened at the hotel. She checked in January 26th, was initially in a shared room with other female travelers. Roommates later complained about unsettling behavior, notes on beds telling them to go away, locking doors, and staff moved her to a private room. These are witness accounts summarized in later reporting and documentaries. The LAPD searched her room and found her belongings, laptop, clothes, medication, still there.
One fact often lost in the online noise: LAPD searched the building and used dogs, went through floors and the roof area before she was found. That search, however, did not recover her. Around the same time, law enforcement resources in Los Angeles were stretched thin because of another major event, the Christopher Dorner manhunt, and that affected how quickly some investigations moved. So the missing person search happened in a complicated operational environment.
Now, the elevator footage, it's what most people remember. LAPD released it in February to solicit tips. It shows Elisa in a red hoodie, dark shorts, sandals, entering an elevator late on January 31st. She presses multiple buttons, the doors stay open, she peers out repeatedly, steps partly out, then jumps back in, and performs fluid hand movements. After a while, she steps out to the left, and the doors close with the elevator returning to normal service. That's a straightforward description of the public footage.
And people read so much into that footage. Some see a person who is hiding and terrified. Others see someone doing bizarre gestures that they interpret as signaling. Clinically, when you have a person with bipolar disorder who may be off medication or experiencing psychosis, behavior like looking out cautiously, appearing paranoid, or performing odd, purposeless movements can be consistent with an episode. But Mara, important caveat, The video alone does not let us know her internal experience. It's a piece of behavior to be interpreted in context.
Right. Viewers also pointed out possible issues with the video timestamps and edits. Analysts noted slowed or missing frames. Some said as much as 50-60 seconds looked altered or removed. LAPD and others explained that law enforcement often edits surveillance footage to protect third-party identities or remove irrelevant parts. That acknowledged editing, though understandable in procedure, fed conspiracy theories that something or someone had been deliberately hidden.
And the elevator mechanics matter too. Elevator technicians and online elevator communities explained that the model used at the Cecil had a door hold function. If someone pressed and held that button, the doors could remain open for a minute or two, which matches the prolonged open door scene. Door sensors and door hold circuits can behave oddly on camera, especially when a frame rate change makes the delay look longer. So a technical explanation exists for why the doors didn't close quickly.
Let's not skip the grim discovery. On February 19, 2013, nearly 3 weeks after her disappearance, guests complained about water pressure, discoloration, and foul taste. A maintenance worker, identified in reporting as Santiago Lopez, went to inspect the rooftop water tanks. He found Elisa's body inside one of those tanks. Fire crews and coroner's personnel recovered her after draining and opening the tank. Her body was later ruled an accidental drowning by the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office in June 2013, with bipolar disorder listed as a significant condition.
Autopsy details are crucial. The coroner found no major trauma, no signs of sexual assault, no stab or gun wounds, and no defensive injuries reported in public accounts. Toxicology showed no illicit drugs or significant alcohol. Prescription medications were present at low or trace levels, suggesting inconsistent dosing. From a psychiatric perspective, inconsistent medication adherence in bipolar disorder raises the risk of severe mood episodes and psychosis, which the coroner flagged as a contributing factor, but not the direct cause.
There was also confusion early on about the state of the tank hatch. Reports initially varied about whether the lid was closed or open at discovery. That discrepancy became a seed for suspicion online. Later, more detailed accounts, including the maintenance workers, indicated the hatch was open when he looked in, and officials later closed it after the discovery. Still, those early conflicting reports have had a long life in conspiracy circles.
On the question of how Elisa could have reached the roof, the building had internal stairwell doors that were reportedly locked and alarmed, but external fire escapes were visible and accessible from some guest windows and hallways. Investigations and documentary reenactments showed that a person could climb those fire escapes to the roof without triggering internal alarms. Once on the roof, tanks had short ladders and platforms that made it possible to reach the hatch. That's consistent with what police concluded. She likely climbed out a fire escape and reached the tanks on her own.
Yes, and that aligns with how the hotel itself functioned then. The Cecil, opened in 1924, was in a part of downtown LA adjacent to Skid Row, and over decades became a low-cost residential and transient hotel with a dark reputation. Historical crimes, suicides, and the presence of notorious figures like Richard Ramirez and Jack Unterweger gave the building a notorious aura. That aura didn't prove anything about Elisa's death, but it shaped how people perceived events there.
Which brings us to the most commonly discussed theories. First, foul play or murder. Supporters of that idea point to the elevator behavior as if she were fighting, the initial confusion about the tank lid, and the hotel's grim history. Factually, though, no evidence of assault was found in the autopsy. No forensic traces of another person in the tank have been publicly reported, and police and the coroner concluded there was no basis for homicide charges. So, while the theory is compelling to many, it's not supported by the publicly available forensic record.
Second, paranormal explanations, hauntings, and curses grew out of the hotel's history. Those narratives are powerful in the cultural imagination, and they fueled documentaries and horror shows. The empirical record, however, offers no verifiable evidence of supernatural activity. These explanations function more as urban legend than as factual interpretation. They're part of the story, but they're not evidence.
The third major theory, and the one that matches the official findings and expert analysis, is a severe mental health crisis leading to disorganized behavior. Elisa's documented bipolar disorder, her history of paranoid episodes reported by family, witness accounts of erratic behavior in the days before she vanished, and toxicology suggesting inconsistent medication levels all fit a scenario where she experienced a psychotic or manic episode and made choices that put her at risk, like climbing to the roof and entering a tank. Clinically, that remains the most parsimonious explanation consistent with the available facts.
I want to pause there and underline the ethical issue. Online sleuthing and virality had serious harms. The footage was re-uploaded and dissected, and in the process, innocent people were accused. One musician who had stayed at the Cecil years earlier was falsely targeted and received death threats. And Elisa's personal writings were weaponized, taken out of context, and used as evidence in theories that often stigmatized mental illness. We have to remember she was a real person, not a puzzle to be solved for clicks.
Absolutely. The cycle of sensationalism around mental health is pernicious. Instead of centering empathy in the clinical facts, much of the public response turned to lurid hypotheses. That increases stigma for people living with bipolar disorder and discourages nuanced conversations about medication adherence, access to care, and the challenges of traveling alone with a serious psychiatric condition. Those systemic issues are part of what we should be talking about.
Let's return to specifics people often ask. What about the tank itself? Could someone survive getting into it or climb out? Experts and documentary reenactments showed those tanks are deep, narrow, and lack footholds. If clothing becomes waterlogged and the person is cold and panicked, getting out would be extremely difficult without assistance. That mechanical reality helps explain how an accidental drowning could occur, even if there was no struggle or assault.
There's also the phenomenon of paradoxical undressing in hypothermia. People sometimes remove clothing in cold water due to intense confusion or a sensation of burning warmth. The coroner noted Elisa was found naked and concluded clothes may have come off during attempts to stay afloat or as part of such processes. That's a documented medical phenomenon and gives one plausible explanation for her state.
Now, the family filed a wrongful death suit against the hotel, alleging inadequate security and failure to prevent access to the roof and tanks. The hotel argued the roof was locked and alarmed, and that Elisa had to have taken an unconventional route, such as the fire escape. Ultimately, a judge dismissed the lawsuit, finding the incident was not reasonably foreseeable as negligence. That's the legal outcome, though it leaves open the ethical question of whether the property should have had stronger safeguards given its location and history.
And that ethical question ties into broader systemic failures. Access to consistent mental health care, social supports, and safe housing. Elisa was a young woman traveling alone, and continuity of medication, especially for bipolar disorder, is critical. The coroner's report and media analyses pointed to low or inconsistent medication levels as a relevant factor. That's not a moral judgment of Elisa. It's a clinical observation that highlights how fragile safety nets can be.
We also need to talk about the Netflix documentary, The Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel, which brought renewed attention in 2021. It re-examined the case, the hotel's history, and the role of internet sleuths. Some viewers criticized the way the series balanced respect for Elisa with sensational material about the property's past. It's a reminder that media choices can either humanize victims or re-exploit them, depending on how producers frame the narrative.
That framing affects public imagination. For many, the elevator video became a Rorschach test. People projected their fears of murder, of hauntings, of conspiracies onto a grainy clip. Clinicians and journalists both need to insist on labeling hypotheses clearly, distinguishing confirmed facts from theories. In this case, the official record supports an accidental drowning, with bipolar disorder as a significant contributing factor. Everything else remains speculation unless new, credible evidence emerges.
Let's enumerate what remains unanswered. First, we still don't know Elisa's exact state of mind in those final hours. The video is behavior, not a thought transcript. Second, the precise route and timeline to the roof is not fully documented publicly. Which window, which stair, what time exactly. Third, early confusion about the tanklet created lasting doubt, even though later accounts indicate the hatch was open at discovery. Fourth, whether better security could have prevented this. A legal question addressed in court, but an ethical question still unresolved. And finally, systemic failures in continuity of mental health care for travelers with serious illness.
All valid points. And I'd add that even accepting the most likely clinical explanation doesn't solve the human tragedy. We can understand mechanisms, hypothermia, inability to exit a tank, a psychotic break, and still grieve that a young woman with creativity and family connections died away from home in circumstances that feel sudden and unjust. The unanswered pieces are often the most painful because they keep people imagining alternatives.
You mentioned earlier the internet's harms. I want to give a concrete example. After the video went viral, millions of viewers made reaction videos, compiled timeline theories, and formed communities around the mystery. A portion of that attention directed harassment at people who had nothing to do with the case and dug relentlessly into Elisa's private writings. That's not just tasteless. It caused real damage to bystanders and to her family's grief. We need to talk about ethics in true crime.
Ethics in true crime means centering victims, checking facts, and avoiding defamatory speculation. It also means talking honestly about mental health without shaming. For listeners, a practical takeaway is to ask, who benefits from a narrative? Does it humanize or exploit? Is it sourced? And are we amplifying harm by repeating unverified claims? These questions are small but important checks on how the public consumes cases like Elisa's.
Before we close, Andrew, listeners often ask, when does speculation cross into harm? Like, where's the line?
Good question, Mara. Speculation becomes harmful when it targets real people with accusations absent evidence, when it invades private grief, or when it spreads stigma that discourages help-seeking. For example, using Elisa's mental health history to imply she was less valuable or to sensationalize her death is harmful. Also, doxing, threats, and harassment that sprang from online sleuthing are criminal and destructive. So the line is crossed when the narrative moves from inquiry to harassment, or when it trades in unverified defamatory claims.
Thanks. And one last practical note from me. If you're curious about the case and want to learn more, look to reputable reporting, the People magazine recap, analyses from outlets like The Wrap, and the Coroner's Own report, and avoid the clickbait. Context matters, and primary sources are best. Andrew, any final thoughts?
Just this: hold empathy and curiosity together. Curiosity drives investigation, which can be useful, but empathy keeps us from turning someone's death into entertainment. In terms of clinical takeaways, consistent treatment and social supports save lives. When people with severe mental illness travel or lose continuity of care, risk rises. That should be part of any public conversation about what happened to Elisa.
To close, let's say plainly, the official findings are that Elisa Lam died by accidental drowning in a rooftop water tank at the Cecil Hotel on February 19, 2013, and bipolar disorder was cited as a significant contributing condition. Many questions remain in public imagination, and internet culture transformed a private human tragedy into viral fascination. We owe Elisa the decency of clarity and the dignity of remembrance beyond the elevator clip.
Amen to that. Thank you for listening and for holding this story with care. If you're carrying questions about mental health or know someone who needs help, reach out to local resources. And if you're engaging with true crime material online, pause before you share or speculate. Think about the real people involved.
Thanks, Andrew, and thank you to our listeners. If you found this episode useful, please look for our show notes. We've listed the primary sources used in today's episode for anyone who wants to read further. This is Still Unanswered. I'm Mara Kwan. We'll be back with another case soon.
Goodbye for now. Take care of yourselves.